Hello, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine, Content Specialist for the Florida Joint Center for Citizenship, which is part of the School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs at the University of Central Florida in Orlando. Welcome to our Middle School Civics Highlights series. We'll be focusing our attention on Benchmark 2.2, when we will differentiate between obligations and responsibilities of U.S. citizenship and evaluate their impact on society. In Part 2, we will use scenarios to assess specific obligations of citizens and identify the consequences for society if citizens do not fulfill their obligations and responsibilities. We will use scenarios so that we'll get a good understanding about what some of these situations might look like. We'll also have a good discussion about the consequences or predict the outcome if citizens do not fulfill their obligations and responsibilities. We will assess the consequences for society because it really does have an impact on everyone's experience based on whether or not and how people fulfill their responsibilities. We're going to begin with scenarios to assess specific obligations of citizens, focusing on obeying the law. Clarence Earl Gideon was charged in a Florida state court with having broken and entered a pool room with intent to commit a misdemeanor. So here we have Clarence Earl Gideon destroyed property, right? He broke into a pool room. His intent for breaking into the pool room was to commit a misdemeanor, which is a classification of a crime. A higher level crime, one that brings a longer prison sentence if a person is convicted, would be a felony. So what we find here is that Clarence Earl Gideon, first he destroyed property, he intended to commit a misdemeanor, but by committing this, what he thought was a misdemeanor, it turns out that the offense was a felony, a higher level of crime under Florida law. He intended to steal, he intended to destroy property so that he could steal, etc. So Clarence Earl Gideon did not follow the law, according to this description from the U.S. Supreme Court in its Gideon versus Wainwright opinion. What are the consequences for society if the law is not followed? People and property would be less safe. So by not obeying the law, Clarence Earl Gideon, according to this excerpt, made people and property less safe. Next, we're going to focus our attention on paying taxes. What you see from this very interesting information graphic is the issue of where does your dollar go? So when a person pays taxes, that means that they are taking money of theirs and giving that money to the government. And so here what we see is a very interesting, very colorful information graphic that says for every dollar, a certain percentage goes to certain government services. So the way that we can compute this very easily is since a dollar is 100 cents, this means that 23% of a dollar goes in one place and 19 cents of that dollar goes someplace else. So it really does give us a sense about where those tax dollars go. What are the consequences for society if taxes are not paid? Well, there would be less access to government services such as Social Security and a national defense. And by having less access, meaning the government would not be able to provide these services, so we would have less access to Social Security. We would have less access to feeling safe and secure with a national defense. Next, we look at serving on juries. What we have presented here is the text of the Sixth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. The Sixth Amendment is part of the U.S. Bill of Rights because that's the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And what I've done here is I have bolded the text that matters for our discussion here. In all criminal prosecutions, the accused shall enjoy, among other things, a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury of the state and the district where the crime shall have been committed. Now, because the Sixth Amendment is part of the Bill of Rights, it is a right of the person. Rights are those pieces of our experience that the government must guarantee. The government must guarantee our rights. And so that means that the government must provide us with impartial juries of the state and district where the crime shall have been committed if we are accused of a crime. And the only way to do that is to send citizens who are adults, send citizens a jury notice, and for them to abide by it, for them to decide that to do their civic duty and to participate in the common good, that they are going to serve on a jury, even if they don't want to. Now we're going to look at scenarios to assess obligations of citizens, focusing on registering for selective service. Selective service is a requirement for men age 18 to 25. They must register for selective service within a certain number of days or weeks after their 18th birthday, if not before. And if they do not register for selective service, they are at risk for losing their voting rights, losing access to federally funded college scholarships, and other privileges and opportunities. Now, selective service means that men ages 18 to 25 put their names on a list. And they put their names on a list so that in the event of a national emergency, they could be called up. This is not registering for the draft. There has not been a draft in the United States for several decades. However, even though there is no draft, there still needs to be a mechanism for having a draft. And the mechanism, the way to have the names to then have a draft if one is needed, is to register for selective service. If men age 18 to 25 do not register for selective service, then the U.S. government would not be able to form a large armed forces in the event of a national emergency. Now, some of you may be wondering, what about women? Well, women are forbidden from registering for selective service, even if it's something that they'd like to do. Thank you for joining me for Middle School Civics Highlights. Do you still have questions? Please contact us using the information that appears on the screen. Till next time, I'm Dr. Terry Susan Fine. Thank you for joining me.